Good afternoon. It's Monday the 27th of January 2014, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column Live from our Plymouth, England studios. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
Well, first of all, the weather, and I'm afraid that the UK Column Live weather computer has given us Zulu Zulu today, double Zs, which means stormy weather and very heavy to torrential rain, which of course is what we've had overnight. So I'm afraid for the West Country at least it's going to be a pretty wet, gloomy day, and I suspect that's the case for much of the UK. Chin up. Okay, well, we're leading off with a story about the police here. It comes back on the favourite subject of privatisation.
Yes, possibly. Well, thanks to Malcolm from Inquiring Minds for this one. This is police staff, civilian staff that are working for the police in Wiltshire are to be handed over to the control of Wiltshire Council. Unison, the public service union, is obviously saying that this puts the public at risk. This is a pretty staggering situation. 215 staff who are currently working in the back office for Wiltshire Police to be handed over to the council. Where do you end up? Where's the demarcation? Where's the sort of lines between council staff and police staff at this point? I mean, what happens to policing in this country when this type of thing happens? It could clearly be a first step towards privatisation, of course, as councils privatise and outsource more and more of the services that they provide. But at the same time, what happens between the police and the councils when the councils issue orders for council tax, refusal to pay council tax, for example?
Yeah.
When the bailiffs turn up on the doorstep, who are the police going to be working for? Are they
the council.
Right. So this is a very dangerous situation,
Absolutely.
isn't it? Yeah.
I think it fits in totally, of course, with multi-agency working, and if people still don't understand what that is, it's a key component of David Cameron's Big Society. So by the time we've got the police with local authorities, the local NHS, mental health, probation service, all working together, for example, and now we've mixed up who's working for who, as you say here, Mike, we're getting into a very dangerous position indeed. I know one of our viewers calls it friendly fascism, so that it's delivered with a smiling face and a sharp suit, but what you're really looking at is something akin to East Germany being built in front of our eyes while we continue to allow it to happen. Well, there's much confusing news at the moment, and maybe this is a good one to follow on from the police. The Daily Telegraph here saying it's time for GCHQ to come out of the shadows. And this is quite an extraordinary little article by Charles Moore, because as you dig into it, he starts to get quite enthusiastic about the good works of GCHQ. But of course, the reality is we have no idea what this organisation is now up to, or indeed who is monitoring it. And we've just flagged up there, of course, the fact that the political charity Common Purpose has already penetrated this organisation. So UK Column and cpexposed.com that first posted up the names of the GCHQ operatives that had been trained by Common Purpose. So who monitors this lot as they monitor us? Well, we come back to this organisational setup. The Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee overseeing the Secret Intelligence Service, GCHQ and MI5. And that, of course, brings us to look at Malcolm Rifkin, who's chair, William Hague, and also, of course, the Prime Minister. And what we've pointed out there is that all three of these men have declared their allegiance to Israel by means of their membership of Conservative Friends of Israel. And we have a quote there by our beloved King David, who says, "My belief in Israel is unshakable. I am proud of the key role Conservative Friends of Israel play within our party." So I don't know what the truth is, Mike, but could it be that we actually not only have three very dubious men in charge of our security, but possibly we've now got connections into overseas governments as well? It gets more interesting. Another one from the Telegraph here. We're back on the subject now very much of Syria. as the talks go on. The struggle to survive in the suburbs starved by Bashar al-Assad. Here's the little sub-headline. Some of the residents allowed to leave Yarmouk tell of the horrors they've left behind. This photograph, I think I'm correct in saying, is actually undated. So if you just look at the article itself and look at the picture, what are you looking at? Are you looking at reality, or are you looking at something that's been a little bit moulded? Just a thought. But the Express getting into it here, because all of a sudden we've now got William Hague, of course one of the lead men who was pressing for the attack on Syria, is now saying we're working on a plan to take in vulnerable Syrian refugees. I look at this with cynicism that we've got a problem in the moment with numbers of people coming into the country. We've had the British government clearly stirring up the violence in Syria. They didn't get their way with the strike, but now what's going to happen is we've got another problem being delivered to our doorstep.
Well, I believe that this is actually an attempt by the government to get some public feeling into this, deal with Syria before we have to take the refugees into the country. So it's an effort to build a problem, which will result in the public calling for a solution.
Which is the one they want, of course. It might not all be straight sailing for those that come back to UK from Syria. This is from the 25th of January. But of course, the BBC, hot on the case, Britons returning from Syria face arrest, says police chief. And the inference of this article is, of course, anybody coming back from Syria is supposedly a potential terrorist, and they've got to be arrested at the border. So we've got Britain's borders totally out of control at the moment in the hands of the border agency. We've got people in the country being frightened, or that's the aim of these sorts of articles. We're going to be frightened that anybody we meet who's Asian is going to be a jihadist, and people coming back to the UK are going to be arrested. Well, it's ramped up further here with the Mirror. We've got two young gentlemen who went off to fight in Syria. It now appears they've been killed. So here's the Mirror headline: the face of British terror tourism. A state agent and his brother who've died fighting in Syria. And note what it says: with Al-Qaeda. So if you dig into the article, what it actually says is jihadists posting online claim one brother had fought for the group Jabhat al-Nusra, while the other joined the ranks of the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, both linked to Al-Qaeda. So we've got a factual headline, Al-Qaeda. Now it's talking about being linked to Al-Qaeda. Where's the truth? It's getting very mucky.
Well, what's interesting is that, of course, the Syrian opposition are not Al-Qaeda when it suits that side of the story, but when it suits the other side of the story, then they are. So where does it sit? The government seems to be a bit inconsistent on this one.
If we accept that nobody has produced any substantial proof that Al-Qaeda exists as a terrorist organisation in the form we're told, then of course we can see the state one day is treating it as a friend and the next day it's a terrorist organisation. But it gets worse, because the Telegraph here muscling in with this headline: US forces launch missile strike against al-Shabaab leader in Somalia. They apparently attacked a vehicle with a drone, but the Americans said they didn't know whether they actually killed the intended target. And Kenya media here reporting that as a result of the attack, people were being briefed to expect retaliation. So the Americans very cleverly go and do another drone strike. They're not even sure what they're aiming at, because they're not sure who they've killed. And then we're all to be surprised that all of a sudden the violence is escalating. Well, the BBC, as usual, has been in there. So a few days back in 2013, September, but here's the BBC suddenly getting very interested in Al-Shabaab. And the key thing is, according to the BBC, absolutely linked with Al-Qaeda. So Somalia, another destabilising area. And of course, if you want to find out more about what the BBC is doing in unstable countries, go and have a look at their political charity, BBC Media Action. Well, the farce gets worse because, of course, we're interested in ladies' underwear. And the Mail here reporting the British student arrested at Heathrow because she had £16,000 hidden in her knickers, which was clearly going to fund the terrorists in Syria. The Mail seems to have forgotten, of course, about David Cameron and William Hague arranging for very large amounts of money to be moved across to the then terrorists in Libya. But knickers are an important part of the terrorist inventory, and the Star here, of course, picking up on the White Widow's saucy lingerie secret. Now, we're presenting this in a very dry form. Is it funny? Roughly. But in fact, in terms of the security of Britain, this is absolutely appalling that the public is supposedly to believe this utter rubbish that's now appearing in the mainstream press. Well, let's just think about Al-Qaeda and let's think about the Tory party, and that must bring us to Conservative MP Brooks Newmark. Let's follow through what this gentleman got up to. He told us back in August 2013 that he'd been sitting on the Syrian border where he met General Idris, the leader of the Syrian Free Army. Here he is. So Brooks Newmark told him that hopefully airstrikes and missiles would soon be raining down on Assad's military infrastructure. Brooks Newmark admitted we're about 150,000 Free Syria Army fighters, and here we are, the 7,500 Jabhat al-Nusra fighters, which have links with Al-Qaeda. Now, Brooks Newmark has refused consistently to answer our questions about why he was meeting with people linked to Al-Qaeda. We've had no response, and South West Devon MP Gary Streeter has refused to give help to getting a truthful answer. But we'd like to know why the Conservative Party appear to be helping those linked to these terrorists. So here he is, Prime Minister, and he's given us a warning that Syria is attracting and empowering a new cohort of Al-Qaeda-linked extremists, but his own MPs are busy talking to those connected to them. Fascinating stuff, and just so that we know, of course, the Secret Intelligence Service under Mr. Rifkin, Hague and Cameron is also telling us that the most significant threat we face is from Al-Qaeda and presumably ladies' underwear. Well, there we are. That's what the man wanted. So more trouble in the Ukraine.
Well, yeah, so the situation in the Ukraine's going from bad to worse as Western-backed NGOs and political agitators ramp up the moves for civil war. And I think this is looking increasingly like a Syrian situation in the Ukraine. So-called demonstrators have taken control of the Justice Ministry building, and these demonstrators belong to an organisation called Spilna Sprave, which translates to Common Cause.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness.
Did somebody not brief them that they weren't supposed to name themselves after the organisation that set them up?
Indeed. But in the meantime, the leader of the opposition Democratic Alliance for Reform has tried and failed to convince these protesters to leave the building and give it back to the Justice Ministry. Now, this organisation, Spilna Sprave, has been around for a while. They've been their leader has been called in by the police on several different occasions to try to answer certain allegations. Nothing has stuck so far, but they seem to be what might be described as extremist. I haven't found out who's funding them yet, but I think that should be an interesting piece of research for somebody if anybody wants to take that up. It could be Soros and Chums, as pointed out in the chat box. I don't know. But in the this is not the only area. We've got Syria, we've got Ukraine. We've also got to consider that we've got Thailand. So now we've got an anti-government protest leader shot and killed in Bangkok. And he's been identified as Suthin Tharathan. And a spokesman for the police said that he had been shot in the head and the chest. So that's nice. That brings the death toll to 10 in anti-government protests since November. So Thailand also being ramped up. Here we've got the US calling for peaceful solutions in Thailand.
But That'll be a drone attack, presumably.
Possibly,
Peaceful
yes,
solution.
yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And last week we had a bomb going off at an anti-government rally in Bangkok, injuring more than 30 people. So stuff ramping up in Thailand. In Egypt, then we've got 50 people killed. Well, actually, 49 people killed in a bomb explosion on Saturday. And this is on the anniversary of the conflict, the third anniversary of the uprising that overthrew Mubarak. 247 people wounded, of course. I would imagine some of those pretty seriously if 49 people were killed. And of course, it goes on because last week as well, it was Friday just before the Saturday bomb, 4 other explosions and 6 killed and 80 injured. And so as a result, Egypt has decided that it's going to change the way that it's going to be running its parliament, its elections. But for the president and for the parliament, and of course, that's likely to quote deepen tensions. So changing the agreed election plan isn't going to help things in Egypt, and in China. Then we have the situation: 12 dead in Xinjiang violence. So this is BBC reporting that so-called terrorists involved in a protest. Of course, this again is Islamic-related protest in China, and so it goes on. Now, this report here reporting that China's Communist Party fears organised protest. I mean, the report really is inciting organised protest in a sense.
It is, but isn't it interesting? And I've spotted it today in some other mainstream headlines that they're actually talking China communist. So we've got communist China. That's the word. It's still a communist state, but this is the very country that David Cameron is inviting into UK to take over our power generation
Absolutely,
industry.
but at the same time, we're seeing the same type of destabilisation going on within the country, as we're seeing in other countries. We've got activists being thrown in prison, so of course this is going to incite more activism in its own right. And in the meantime, we have Sergei Lavrov again pointing out that external interference is stirring up the situation in Ukraine. Actually, he also mentions the tension within Russia as well. We've got the Sochi Olympics coming up, and I will be very surprised. Hopefully nothing will happen, but I'll be very surprised if nothing happens during these. Perhaps it's just the security is going to be so tight that it's going to be pretty unpleasant for people that are visiting the thing, but equally unpleasant or difficult for people that are wanting to disrupt it. But we have reports like this of the Mujahideen urging all kinds of Russians to revolt against the Putin government. So we've got this whole destabilization both around Russia and China and within Russia and China. And in the meantime, China, the Chinese media absolutely sending a fairly stark warning to the US not to meddle in the region. So they've just run missile drills on their nuclear arsenal. They've now published photographs. I believe this is the first time they've ever published photographs of that drill taking place, and sending a pretty stark warning. And now we have Russia and Chinese Navy starting to. I believe this is the first time they've done this as well. And certainly from the report, it sounds like it's tentative steps towards future
basic manoeuvres to get these ships working together.
And so this has got to be seen from a strategic point of view, geopolitical point of view, as a fairly dangerous move as well. But
of course, one of the major things is simply to have Chinese warships operating in the Mediterranean themselves. Used to be known as a United States Navy pond.
Right.
Now we've got the Chinese there with the Russians. So I think it's significant. This is small scale, but a show of force, basically.
Absolutely, and the war drums are absolutely beating on both sides, it seems. Yeah. So perhaps there is something in this speculation from many people about the similarities between 2014 and 1914, but it's certainly it's certainly a situation right around the world. It needs to be cooled down a bit, I think.
Well, of course, key thing for viewers and listeners is this is not all happening by accident. We've got men and women behind the scenes ramping this up, and it continues to happen, or will continue to happen until we withdraw our consent. But if the Russian and Chinese navies are operating successfully in the Mediterranean, then clearly the Royal Navy isn't. With a wonderful headline from the Express, the Ministry of Defence buys back HMS Ark Royal scrap parts to fix HMS Illustrious. So having removed all of our fixed-wing capability and destroyed 2 of the 3 carriers, we've got a helicopter carrier left, as it were. We're now begging back scrap parts from Turkey in order to keep Illustrious at sea. But don't worry, they've said that this is all to save money. And of course, we should look at...
Sorry, can I just understand that? I just don't quite get that. You're saying we sell them a ship for next to nothing, which they scrap, and then we buy the parts back that we need from them, and that's in order to save money?
Yeah, well, they've assured the British taxpayer that they've saved, I think it's £57,000 by buying our own equipment back. It is a save. Clearly, it's a saving.
But if they'd given the contract to a British scrap company, that could have provided jobs for a significant period of time, and then we wouldn't have had to buy it back at all, would we?
But of course, the aim, Mike, is not to provide anybody in Britain with a job, never mind what religion or colour you are. David Cameron working very well on the transformation process to deindustrialise Britain. How can this happen? Well, it can happen because we allow people like this to run the country. So the Express has said that Lord Prescott backs votes for prisoners. Was he thinking about Tony Blair? He's looking after the future interests of Tony Blair, maybe. But we just say that after interfering with his young floozy in Westminster, who made this man a lord and who cares what he has to say? Let's just remind ourselves. So this is a perfect example of the standard of man who has been running this country, not just an MP, Deputy Prime Minister. And of course, at the time the Deputy Prime Minister's office was running under Prescott, we had a massive influx of the political charity Common Purpose. So until we, the British public, decide that these people need to be removed in an appropriate way, of course, we can expect this drama to unfold around us. And we need to keep a close eye on the media. We're hammering the Telegraph a little bit today. But what was this article all about? 2 young people run off all over the newspapers. Is it because they came from Stonyhurst, which I believe is a Jesuit college? If anybody can tell me what this story is really about, I'd like to know. But I think it's a distracting story. Why do we want to distract people? Well, here's the reality. NHS crisis over patient neglect as 39 hospitals face legal action over blunders. So the trouble in the NHS continues. The Guardian picking up on the fact that we've now got a huge number of the NHS staff who have come from overseas. We know this brings all sorts of problems with language, views, values, religion, standards. But let's not blame the people who've been invited in. Let's just have a look at, for example, where these statistics have come from. And here we are, the Health and Social Care Information Centre. And as the text says there, this has been set up on the 1st of April 2013 as an executive non-departmental public body under the Health and Social Care Act 2012. So who would be involved in such an organisation? Well, here's the chairman, Kingsley Manning, 30 years experience in advising health authorities. In view of the fact we've got major collapse of the NHS, was it as a result of his advice? Possibly. But he's also been involved with the leading firm of health and information consultants. And he's also been executive chairman of Tribal Group's health business and a senior advisor at McKinsey & Company.
McKinsey just seems to pop up and pop up and pop up. Everywhere you look, McKinsey is somewhere.
McKinsey or Ernst & Young or PricewaterhouseCoopers. So we just thought we'd have a look at a couple more people. And my goodness, well, the Ministry of Defence has had problems. Here he is, second permanent secretary of the Ministry of Defence, who retired from the civil service in 2009. And He's also been involved in the Shambles, which has been the UK Serious Organised Crime Agency. But he's been part of the MOD. He's also was running their Ministry of Defence Trading Fund, which is quite interesting. So we've got a Ministry of Defence man, sort of, who's now hopped across to help sort out the NHS. We've got Lucinda. Well, she looks a good lady, former executive director of an investment bank, clearly the sort of people that we need to have in the NHS. And she's been responsible for the NHS pay. And I think we've seen a bit of friction over that. And, well, here is the lady who's been advising on human resources. But isn't it human resources we're now told we've got a problem with within the NHS?
Yeah.
But not to worry, because she's trained.
Okay.
Well, we've got something similar here. This is The Independent. They picked up on an article we reported last week, at the end of last week, about a row between Michael Gove and the head of Ofsted, Sir Michael Wilshaw. He's apparently spitting blood now. Basically, he wants Ofsted to be able to monitor free schools and academy schools, and Mr. Gove doesn't like that, so he sent his attack dogs out. Very interesting background. Just let's have a look here. We've got this comment, which is in this article and several other mainstream papers. The right-wing think tank Civitas has since urged the government to set up a separate body to take over inspections for the free and the academy schools. And Policy Exchange, an independent think tank set up by Mr. Gove, you understand the subtlety of this, has asked schools to provide them with evidence on whether or not Ofsted is still fit for purpose. So we've taken a little look, as we do, into Civitas. Here it is. It says they work in two main groups: services for the public, research and education programs. So they're independent, no problem at all. Here's part of the structure. The chief executive, David Green. He's been working with many of the big newspapers, the Sunday Times, Sunday Telegraph, undergraduate with the Newcastle upon Tyne, University of Newcastle upon Tyne, also a research fellow at the Australian National University. So clearly a man who's got a lot of knowledge to help what's going on in this country. They're also involved with a school which they helped set up. So they're totally independent, really, of the education system. But here we are. We've got a Justin Shaw, Director and Deputy Chairman of the new model school company. He was Chairman of Civitas, but he remains a trustee. But of course, they're independent of all these things. And this is where it gets interesting, because when we spoke to Civitas this morning to actually ask them where the money came from, roughly £2.5 million, they were very reluctant to say. They got a bit shirty with us because they said, well, we're a charity, we're the same as Macmillan. I hope I've spelt that properly. We take issue with that because clearly Macmillan is there desperately trying to help people in serious circumstances, but Civitas is a political policy group. So here's the other one, the Policy Exchange, independent UK leading think tank. Educational charity, mission to develop and promote new policy ideas. So they're telling us they're political. They're very intricate in the way they're doing all of their research. Here's one of the top men. Well, what's he got? A background in the Daily Telegraph and the Spectator, and editor of Prospect magazine, but now he's forming policy over education. And if you'd like to have a look at this one, we got Mark McGregor, the Deputy Director. He's been involved in politics for over 20 years. In 2004, he was Campaign Director for Steve Norris, the London Mayor's bid, and a parliamentary candidate. He was also CEO of Conservative Central Office. But this is an independent think tank.
Not.
Here's an independent report from Policy Exchange on profit-sharing model for the state-funded school system. Is that an oxymoron there?
Something moronic about it anyway.
Well, here we are. I know the text is a bit small, but we've got Andrew Laird. He previously worked for Tribal Consulting and for the Conservative Party as an advisor on welfare, pensions and treasury policy. So there's no sort of conflict of interest. Oh, he's also been a mentor on the Cabinet Office Mutualisation Pathfinder programme. So these are government placemen. You can have a look at these yourself and make up your own mind. Director for New Schools Development, and James Groves down there, Magdalen College. Well, he's read modern history, so must be the man. And of course, there you are, Mike, reference to PricewaterhouseCoopers. This is what they say about themselves. Our research is independent and evidence-based, but we share our ideas with policymakers from all sides of the political spectrum. And there are numerous examples of where our policy ideas have been taken forward by government. So really, this is government buried into the so-called charity sector.
Question is, did that policy come as a result of the papers that they write, or did it come as a result of them picking up the phone or going for a beer with somebody?
Well, I believe the key is the money. Where does the money come from? Because whoever puts the money in gets the policy they want. What are we talking about here? A mere £3.2 million. We spoke to Policy Exchange this morning and said, where does the money come from? They don't want to tell us. So
there seems to be a pattern.
Seems to be a bit of a pattern there. Perhaps the money has come from the banks.
I don't think so, because they don't have any. But basically this is HSBC apologising now following the cash withdrawal issue in Britain. This is a result of, well, what happened. The BBC had their Money Box programme over the weekend, in which some people said that they were having trouble lifting relatively large amounts of cash, say £10,000 in cash. And what was happening was that people were being told by HSBC, well, no, we can't give you that amount of cash unless you can provide evidence for what you're going to use it for. So in other words, they were expecting them to go and get a letter from the recipient as evidence of what they were going to use the money for. And HSBC said that that was part of a policy change put into effect in November, but they didn't tell anybody about it. So they have, since the BBC article on Moneybox and Radio 4, they have quickly done a U-turn, and they're now saying it is not mandatory for customers to provide documentary evidence for large cash withdrawals, and on its own, failure to show evidence is not a reason to refuse a cash withdrawal. We apologise to any customer who's been given correct information and inconvenienced. But it seems to me that this was probably a little exercise. The BBC tells the world what's been going on at HSBC. This type of thing's been going on for quite some time at many, many banks. And really they're gauging public reaction to it. I think HSBC doesn't have any money actually to give to anybody, and that's kind of hinted at here by one of the quotes from the British Banking Association. This is Eric Leenders, who said, I can understand it's frustrating for customers, but if you're making the occasional large cash withdrawal, the bank wants to make sure that it's the right way to make the payment.
Oh, right. So we should trust bankers to run our finances, never mind theirs.
No. The key point about that is, of course, they don't want you to take the cash because they haven't got any.
Right.
What they want to do is to make an electronic transfer, which they can do in a less honest way, perhaps.
By creating credit.
Or something.
Right.
Amongst each other. And the bank, the HSBC themselves said, asking the right questions, protecting our customers and reducing the risk of money laundering and fraud and other crimes means we're doing the right thing and fulfilling our responsibilities. Yeah, right. Okay, so HSBC is paying £2 billion, or 5 weeks' worth of its profit, to avoid criminal charges in drug cartel laundering cases. So they're really clearly extremely keen to be not involved in laundering here. This is an agreement that was made originally in 2012 with the Justice Department in the United States, which was finally ratified last week, where they will pay £2 billion to see the Justice Department defer any prosecutions, for a while. How long is that going to be? We have to wait and see.
So
5 years at the least.
You can just Well, you know, if you're in the legal sort of system, you sort of don't come in front of a court at all. But if you're a banker, you just sort of gently buy your way out.
You buy your way out of it
on money you've created from nothing.
Well, that you've laundered, probably, as in the case of HSBC, and you've got to say, what is the Justice Department doing? Do they know that this £2 billion will not $2 billion, sorry, will not contain any funds that have been involved in drug activities? I would say they're not in a position to do that, but they seem quite happy to accept that. In the meantime, of course, Lloyds Banking Group, very, very sorry indeed, over its IT glitch, which meant that people weren't able to get small amounts of cash in this case out of Lloyds, out of their cash machines, or in fact out of their debit cards. Very embarrassing for customers apparently who are having their payments declined. And so the bank says sorry. No similarities at all to RBS's IT glitches, which also meant that they weren't able to give anybody any money actually several times over the last 18 months. And in fact, RBS is intending to pay out, or at least is looking at a £1 billion bill to compensate people for its so-called IT glitches. What this all boils down to, of course, is that the banks have no money. Well, maybe it's no surprise that this type of thing appears in the media with all this other stuff going on, but the fact of the matter is that this was a non-story at the end of the day. So Forbes published this over the weekend, suggesting that China was stopping people from making cash transfers between bank accounts, and in fact this has turned out to be untrue, and Forbes has now taken the article down. In fact, what was going on was that there's a public holiday in China at the moment, and the People's Bank of China was taking advantage of that, as they have done in the past, in previous years, to upgrade software on their computer systems. And so that what we're really talking about here is a delay to cash transfers. But nonetheless, with all the real stories that are going on out there, it's not surprising that sometimes the media makes a mistake.
Right.
But at the end of the day, what are we talking about? The banks are bankrupt.
Indeed, fraudulent, corrupt, criminal, and bankrupt, and therefore fully supported by all of Britain's political parties. Well, if we're going to get the truth, we shouldn't be looking for the BBC, but we've got to agree with them on this one. Daily Mail here saying disgraced Frank Boff back on the BBC after cocaine and brothel scandal. So this occurred some time ago, but UK column agrees that probably they've got the right man for the BBC. Why do we think this? Well, the BBC is crowing that they're going to do a programme tonight on the Medhemsley Detention Centre. This is an absolute harrowing story of the most horrific abuse of young people, which the BBC here say that they're going to really get on the inside of and report. Well, we're going to say they haven't investigated Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. Of course, BBC Radio pulled out of investigating abuses there. They haven't done too well over Savile, but it seems to us they can cruise off the work of Bill Maloney of Pie and Mash Films. So we'd encourage you to watch the BBC programme tonight to see exactly what they do and don't say. But if you want the real uncut version, you need to have a look at this film, which is on YouTube. This is Bill Maloney's own documentary into the Medhemsley heroes, and in particular a gentleman called Adam Rickwood, who was one of the abuse victims. If you haven't seen Bill before, here's a picture of him, a fantastic campaigner, and of course at the moment he's working very hard in the background to get the full truth of Elm House and other incidents of abuse across the country. So keep an eye on the BBC. Our view is that the agenda here will be to try and water the thing down. Perhaps we're being unfair, so we'll certainly report on this again tomorrow. But please, if you haven't seen it, get on YouTube and watch Bill Maloney's film.
Just to remind everybody, it's PNM Films is the YouTube user account, so you should be able to find that, and you should probably find a link on pieandmashfilms.com as well.
Yeah. Well, there you have it. We've got some extraordinary events starting to unfold in UK and indeed worldwide. We think we should concentrate on sorting this country out, and if we can do that, the rest of the problems will come good as well. But suffice to say that if we continue to support corrupt, criminal, ignorant MPs who are running the country, we've got to expect the problems we're seeing around us. So can we remove these people? We believe that we can, of course, with appropriate peaceful methods, but it does require people to get out and take action. And that's not tomorrow, that's today and every day.
Yeah, fracking nightmare tonight, 9 p.m. Ian's still up in the northwest, so we'll be attempting a remote connection again, but he will be live at 9 p.m.
Presumably in his rubber dinghy, because I think it's been raining pretty heavily up there.
Well, possibly.
We'll see. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.